I read a lot of great books this year. Which ones rose to the top? I'm Veronica, this is the Reading Chronicles, and these are my top 5 books of 2025. Number 5, Life Hacks for a Little Alien by Alice Franklin. I read this book in March after hearing about it on NPR's Book of the Day podcast. The story is narrated by a linguist in the second-person perspective, and this linguist offers tips on how to navigate Earth to a neurodivergent girl known only as Little Alien. Beyond said tips, the story offers wonderful digressions on the English language and the complexity of the words we use that was particularly delightful to me as a teacher of English to speakers of other languages. English is hard, and the narrator understands this. Why do we say ate instead of eated and went instead of goed when the latter two make much more sense? I see many of my students struggle with these seemingly random rules, and sometimes I have no explanation for them other than, that's how it is. But unlike the narrator, you can pry my belief that literally means literally from my cold dead hands. Little Alien, our protagonist, is an odd girl. When she tells her mother that she's dying a spider, her mother promptly reaches for a book called So Your Child is a Psychopath. We follow her attempts to conform to the rules of school and society through her teenage years, see her teachers and school librarians dismiss her, put her in remedial reading classes, and refuse to offer her more than the graded readers in the young children's series that they believe are appropriate for her age, without ever asking her what her reading level is and what her interests are. Some relief comes in the form of Bobby, the new kid Little Alien is assigned to show around the school and who eventually becomes her friend. And more relief comes in the form of the Voynich manuscript, an old piece of text that a man named Wilfred Voynich became obsessed with, and that our protagonist believes comes from an alien society. Behind all of this, there is the unraveling of her family, her mother suffering from a mental illness, including a hospitalization for what we have to assume is a suicide attempt. However, we don't fully know this to be the case because Little Alien is never told this. We only know what she knows, and we must infer with our knowledge what's really happening in her family life. It felt like a true experience of being a child and not fully understanding everything that's happening around you. While I'm not qualified to comment on the representation of neurodiversity, reviews seem to be favorable in this regard. This is largely because, like Little Alien, Franklin was also not diagnosed as autistic until she was an adult. In her NPR interview in response to the question of what she hopes readers take away from the novel, Franklin said,
If readers are neurodivergent, it would be nice if they read this story and felt like it resonated a bit. If they're neurotypical, perhaps it might shed some more light on what autism can be like for some people. It's hard to encapsulate it, even just within one novel. But also, I just wanted to tell an entertaining, enjoyable story as well. So even if people learn nothing but enjoy the narrative, I think that's still valid. I'd still be pleased with that.
I'd say she accomplished this purpose. I absolutely adored the novel. Number 4, Feeding Ghosts by Tessa Hulse. Graphic memoirs are a subgenre I've become a fan of. So when I found out that a graphic memoir had won the Pulitzer Prize, I promptly scooped it up. Following Hulse's mother and grandmother, the story traces the women's experiences against the backdrop of Chinese history, with Hulse endeavoring to work out the ever-present tensions between her mother and herself. We open with the two of them on a train to China, and Hulse is saying, "If you had told me 5 years ago that my mother and I would find ourselves here, traveling back into the past in the hopes of building a bridge between us, the sheer impossibility would have caught in my throat like a bone." She explains that she grew up in a house choked by ghosts. Her grandmother, Sun Yi, the darkness at the center of it. She only knew 3 things about her grandmother. She was from China, she had once been a journalist and had written a best-selling memoir, and that something happened to make her lose her mind. This book is not an easy read, and if the thought of it being in graphic format makes it seem like it would be quick to flip through, that thought is quickly banished with the wealth of information that Hulse presents on the page. This is essentially a tracing of Chinese history and its wars, the way they affected those who lived there and those who fled during the height of communism. This was not something that was easy for me to understand, largely because I'm fairly ignorant of this part of the world and its history. What's easily evident, though, is the way Sun Yi was discarded by her country and the way this would leave lasting effects on both her daughter and her granddaughter. We learn that Sun Yi, an anti-communist journalist, chose to stay in China when many people were leaving because she had a date with a foreigner, the man who would become Hulse's grandfather. Under the communist regime's practices of controlling people through executions, labor camps, and thought reforms, Sun Yi was interrogated for days about every detail of her life, forced to write confessions of her wrong thoughts and wrong deeds. After each interrogation, she was forced to write a truer version of events. If she didn't add material, she was told she was lying. And if she did add material, she was told that this was evidence of her having lied before and of her being a spy. It becomes easy to see how such practices eventually caused her to lose her grip on reality. One thing I enjoy about memoirs, which Hulse does here, is when the writer admits to the unreliability of their memories and the content of their materials. Her mother is very tight-lipped about her memories of Sun Yi when they were in China, and Hulse questions the veracity of her grandmother's memoir, of her painting herself as a confident young woman in love, fluent in English, when Hulse remembers her as having very little grasp of the English language, and her own mother describes her as naive, irresponsible, always expecting someone else to save her. In essence, Hulse is working to discover who she, Hulse, is, why she feels the need to always run, why she never felt like she could fill in just one category when official forms asked for her race, and why the image of the American cowboy riding away on his horse always held so much appeal for her. Her fraught relationship with her mother, whose experiences with her own mother, Hulse's grandmother, caused her to demand closeness in a way that Hulse could not provide, Hulse feeling frequently overwhelmed by her mother's need to handle her emotions, and her mother's belief that Hulse required therapy, while Hulse found that same therapy to be a tool that was used to hurt her. There is so much raw emotion on the page, and Hulse does little to draw a unifying thread through all of this because there really isn't one. Ultimately, it all comes down to survival, and each of the women has done what they needed to survive, both despite and as a result of the relationships they've had with each other. And the truth when it comes to experiences and emotions is that we will never and can never see it through the same eyes. The book ended up being a great follow-up to a fictional story centering on basically the same events, and which is my number 3, Homeseeking by Karissa Chen. Back in February, I declared that I had read what might be the best book of my year. I wasn't too far off because I continue to think about Suchi and Haiwen, childhood sweethearts whose lives are disrupted by the civil war in China. You know, I almost always resist romance, but what makes this story special is the way it's told. Not only are we treated to both Suchi and Haiwen's differing perspectives, something that I really love, but the stories are told in opposite timelines. We follow Suchi starting in 1938 when she's a little girl and visit distinct periods of her life, moving with her forward through time. We meet Haiwen in 2008 after he's immigrated to the US and started going by the anglicized name Howard, and we follow him backwards through time. It is at this point in 2008 when the two meet each other again for the third time. Howard is a widower, Suchi has divorced her husband, and Howard can't help thinking about what their lives might have been like together. The main reason this happened is a choice he made at 16 to give up his dreams of being a violinist and join the army. From Suchi's perspective, we only see that Hai Wen left without saying goodbye. As the civil war in China wages on, Suchi's parents sent her and her older sister Sulan from Shanghai to Hong Kong, but only Sulan is aware that this is really an attempt to keep them safe, and whether they will ever see their parents again is unknown. We see the job Suchi takes on to make a living for herself and her sister, especially after her sister experiences medical issues, and we see her enter a marriage that she feels forced into. As we move backward from Hai Wen's perspective, we learn of the time that he spent in Taiwan, cast out from the mainland for his participation in the army. He too cut off from any contact with his parents and siblings, and eventually abandoned by the Chinese government. I won't say much more to avoid spoiling the joy of seeing how their lives move forward and back in time, but I will say that the through line is Hai Wen is always wondering when he will be able to return to Suchi, and Suchi is always wondering why Hai Wen left her. For me, this was a highly effective way of telling what would otherwise be a mundane love story. Instead, Chen paints a vivid portrait of the two lives ripped apart by war, and in doing so, highlighting a tumultuous period in Chinese history that Western readers, like myself, may be unfamiliar with. While I may have preferred the book without the final coda, I still found it to be a wonderfully crafted tale of two lives that have always been connected, that serves to educate on this portion of Chinese history and the way it impacted its citizens, and that is ultimately a portrait of two people always struggling to do what they believe is right. 2. The Names by Florence Knapp. Thank God for a book that snaps you out of your reading slump. After reading 3 books in a row that made it onto my bottom 5 list, I picked up this book that was on my 5 new exciting books list for May. When I first came to this book, I only knew what little the publisher had provided on the jacket copy. A woman sets out to register her son's birth, still uncertain about the name she'll give him. Following 3 possible names, the book follows the 3 possible outcomes and how this decision will affect their lives. I thought of this as a sort of multiverse of namings, and multiverses are so hot right now. What I didn't expect was for this book to be richly layered and deeply effective in its exploration of the central themes of family and relationships. I am partially quite glad that I knew nothing more when I started this book, because that lack of knowledge allowed the severity of these themes to hit me like a truck. Suffice it to say, I did not know what I was in for when I turned those first few pages. So if you already know you want to read this book and want to be afforded the same opportunity to be shocked by the story, skip ahead to the next timestamp. If you want to be slightly spoiled, and only slightly because this really does happen in the first few pages, keep on. What I did not expect about this book was that it would be all about domestic violence. When Mother Cora and her 9-year-old daughter Maya head out to the registrar's office, she's expected to name her infant son Gordon after his father, her husband. While her husband wants her to follow this masculine tradition in his family, Cora has never particularly liked the name, and more importantly, she worries that naming her son after him means that he will turn out to be a person similar to him. Maya wonders why it matters so much for her brother to be named after their father, and although Cora doesn't say it aloud, she thinks, it matters because sometimes big men feel small inside. Because some people, like Gordon's father, travel through life believing themselves so far beyond improvement, they come to think their children and their children's children should all be made in their name. Because sometimes their need to please previous generations is greater than their need to love future ones. Maya, in her childlike silliness, thinks her brother should be named Bear. Cora is partial to the name Julian. From that point, just before reaching the registrar's office, the story splits into three. Those of Bear, Julian, and Gordon, spanning 35 years from 1987 to 2022, and three very different versions of their lives as they appear every 7 years. The one constant throughout the novel is the elder Gordon's anger and abuse. Without giving away too much, in some sections, it is largely absent from the family's stories, and in others, it is distressingly present. In one section, I couldn't help wondering what in the yellow wallpaper is happening here. What was so startling about this novel was the way Knapp was able to so astutely write about the effects of abuse on these characters. When Maya's teacher shouts out her name to get her attention, Knapp describes her reaction as, she jumps and in that instant knows, blood thrumming in her ears as she furiously blinks away tears that appear from nowhere. Gordon is a respected physician in the community, so reaching out for help from others is not much of an option because they're far too afraid of him to take him down, and this includes the police. Cora is right that no one would believe the life that she leads with him, one in which he presents himself to be the perfect gentleman, as so many abusers are capable of doing. I won't say much more except to say this novel captures a portrait of abuse and the way it ripples throughout a life, even after the abuser is gone, in a way that I've never seen before. Even if the specific actions have never been experienced by the reader, or never to the degree they're portrayed here, there is much to recognize and empathize with for anyone who has felt a sliver of what it is like to live under someone else's rule and what it feels like to escape out from under it and try to make a new life. And my surprise number one read, The Story of a Heart, Two Families, One Heart, and the Medical Miracle That Saved a Child's Life by Dr. Rachel Clarke. I say surprise because while I was pretty sure I would appreciate this book, I didn't expect to be completely engrossed by it. I think I feared it would be melodramatic and schmaltzy, the literary equivalent of Grey's Anatomy, but no, this is the pit. This winner of the Women's Prize for Nonfiction tells the story of Kira and Max, two 9-year-old children who will forever be connected by the heart they share. On July 30th, 2017, Kira, her mother Loanna, and her younger brother Bradley get on a road that is infamous in the UK for fatal car crashes, largely due to short passing lanes that leave little room for merging. It is on this road that the three will collide with a farmer and his 8-foot trailer carrying his cow to the vet. Loanna and Bradley will suffer major injuries. Kara is kept clinging to life by CPR from bystanders. Meanwhile, in 2016, Emma and Paul have admitted their son Max to intensive care, where he has been diagnosed with dilated cardiomyopathy, a condition that was initially dismissed as asthma, but has left Max weak, and his heart enlarged and too weak to properly pump blood. Emma and Paul were informed that the condition has a 33% chance of resolving, a 33% chance of needing a heart transplant, and a 33% chance of resulting in death. The following year, Max will become part of that middle 33%, and it will be thanks to Kira that he is still alive when Clarke is putting together this story. This is obviously a sad story. We all know what has to happen in order for Max to live, and the outcomes of these two children are known from the beginning. What Clarke does here is work to show everything that the process of a heart transplant entails on both sides, bringing attention and celebration to everyone who makes that possible, most of all the donor and their family who have chosen to give this invaluable gift. But this also includes all of the doctors and nurses who work to diagnose and make the patients comfortable, as well as the transplant specialists who coordinate the event and provide support to families, and the drivers and modes of transportation that bring this vital organ to the person who needs it. Clarke doesn't stop there. She also offers us a brief history of medicine that has made such a feat possible. the American doctor who established a protocol for managing traumas, the Danish doctor who created the first intensive care unit and whose work with polio patients led to the development of mechanical ventilators, the change in belief that the brain, rather than the heart, truly signified death, the lessons of a French embroiderer that allowed a doctor to be able to sew one vessel to another, thus paving the way for all future transplants, and the many doctors who experimented on animals until the first human heart transplant was quietly achieved by a South African doctor in 1976. What makes this story so moving is Clarke's efforts to put a name and a face to everyone involved in the transplantation of a heart, most notably the patients who have served as guinea pigs, knowingly or not, whose dignity was not always preserved, but who paved the way for such monumental breakthroughs. In another writer's hands, this would have been trite. I was in awe of how Clarke effortlessly wove together interviews with family members and medical personnel, interspersed with snippets of history to create a seamless narrative. The choice to tell Kira's story in the present tense lends it a sense of immediacy, putting us in the moment as the doctors run their tests, her family say their goodbyes, and she enters the operating theater to give the gift of her organs. Telling Max's story in the past tense gives it a sense of finality, as if this period has passed. The transplant has already happened, and Kira's heart lives on in the present in Max. She writes of the moment a transplant coordinator enters Kira's details into a database of potential donors. These are the early days, tiny steps, no more really than a slow and creaking tectonic rumble. But if momentum builds, if the stars align, then a vast team of geographically distant surgeons, physicians, perfusionists, pilots, coordinators, porters, anesthesiologists, and nurses may end up toiling, sweating, clamping, and dissecting, until at last, against the clock, in multiple operating theaters around the country, the tragedy of Kira's death is sublimated, against the odds, into new life. Every moment is a precipice, every second a step toward or away from death, and we are the fortunate readers who get to accompany this heart on its journey. These were my top 5 reads of 2025. Which books pleasantly surprised you last year? Let me know in the comments. See you in the next video.